Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll also say Happy Mother's Day today. The race for Congress in Central Kentucky is being watched around the country and fought hard here in the 6th District. Republican incumbent Andy Barr is seeking a 4th term in Washington. The Democrats have a crowded 7-way primary. All of them took part in a forum co-sponsored by WKYT back in April and available on demand now on WKYT.com. State Senator Reggie Thomas was with us a couple of weeks ago here on Kentucky Newsmakers. Today, the perceived front runners, Amy McGrath and Jim Gray, are with us. McGrath, the retired fighter pilot making her first political bid, will be with us shortly. But first, Lexington Mayor Jim Gray, who gave up what may have been an easy run for a 3rd term to enter the race for Congress. Gray was courted by national Democrats to get into the race. He launched his bid in December. Gray joining us now to talk about the race and the challenge of running the city while running for Congress. We appreciate you coming in.
Great to be with you, Bill.
That'd be my first question. This amounts to doing 2 full-time jobs. You're getting around to these counties while at the same time still responsible for all the operations of city government. How are you handling that?
Well, you know, I'm often accused, Bill, of running into a fire when others run away from it. And I'm all about problem solving at whatever level. And I've seen issues here at home which are so severe and so significant that we need guidance and we need leadership in Washington. Lexington is on the right track, but our country is not. And that is the message that I have conveyed in this campaign. It's the message that I feel from my heart is so real and so true.
What differentiates you from the other candidates who are in this race?
Well, you know, Bill, I'd start out by saying, you know, I appreciate Amy McGrath's service. But there's a clear choice in this election. There's a choice between someone with the experience and the performance and the results that I have demonstrated and someone that was recruited to run for this seat as a first-time candidate and just recently actually moved to the district. And so there's a real choice here. I grew up in rural Kentucky in a small town, spent half my life in a small town, and have worked in this district building plants beginning with even before Toyota and the Toyota plant itself. I was part of the recruit team that brought Toyota to Kentucky, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the more than 160 projects that have helped build the economy here. But we're dealing with tough issues today. We're dealing with an opioid epidemic that's hollowing out our communities and destroying families and killing people. More than 64,000 people in our country have died of drug overdoses last year. That's more than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. And we are not willing at the national level to treat this like the crisis it is.
Isn't it fair to say you were recruited into the race as well by the national Democrats?
I was encouraged by many people to make this race. I think I met with you, and we were on this program many times when you asked me about whether I was going to consider running for the race, running for this seat. And I did over time. But we had a lot of issues in Lexington to deal with. And that meant that I was addressing those issues along the path of also considering whether to make this race.
Let's talk about the issues. And you mentioned the opioid crisis, which is very tough. Overdose deaths are around 60,000 a year in the country. Right. Kentucky has also been deemed as lagging in its response to this problem.
That's right.
Is this a problem that, in your view, requires a federal response?
It is a problem that requires a federal response, not just in my view, but in the view of professionals. But I've seen it up close. I see the families that have been destroyed and the families that are grieving. I've seen that up close. And I know that we've got to get our arms around it. There's a stigma associated with it, and we've got to get our arms around that stigma. And this is another place where Amy McGrath and I actually differ in a significant way, and there's a big distinction. Amy has said that there's a limited number of times that Narcan and naloxone, that are life and death drugs, can be administered or should be administered. I say that every life is worth saving. And until we get to that point of recognizing that every life is worth saving, then we're going to keep attaching a stigma to this. We need to deal with it the way we've dealt with it here in Lexington. I created a heroin task force early on in 2013. We created a needle exchange program, first in the state. Administered Narcan and naloxone, drug overdose medications, as you know. And we've been dealing with this, but I know that the $180 million that was created as nationally by $180 million is all that was given to nationally. Now, out of that, only $10 million came to Kentucky to deal with this enormous problem.
Do you believe it has been hollow for the president to have called this a national health emergency and to have, as you say, not provided adequate resources to help battle it?
Well, being on the front lines, Bill, I feel this so strongly. I feel so vigorously about this. And I have seen, in Huntington, West Virginia, it was estimated that it cost the city $100 million a year. Now, that means for Lexington, we're talking perhaps, or this district, tens of millions of dollars. And getting our arms around this means recognizing that it is a national crisis, a national emergency. It affects families, I've already said that. It affects individuals, of course. It's hollowing out our communities, and that means it's affecting our economy in a significant way. I hear companies, people and executives in companies saying every day what a challenge this represents. But we got to tackle it at the very base levels, both in the communities and from a federal level as well.
There's a rekindled debate about gun violence in America in the wake of school shootings and other mass attacks. Unfortunately, we've had a school shooting in Kentucky this year. How would you vote on additional gun restrictions if that came before Congress?
I am a supporter of the Second Amendment, of course, but the Second Amendment was designed to prevent tyranny, not to encourage terrorism. I'm for universal background checks. Last year alone, 3 million guns were sold in this country without background checks. That was at gun shows or over the internet. Now, those loopholes must be closed. I'm for the Murphy-Cornyn legislation that's been proposed associated with universal background checks. We've got to treat this like the crisis it represents in our country. Another example of where we've got to get through this hyper-partisanship and get our arms around the problems. That's what we've done in Lexington, Bill, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the way that we've tackled problems like pension reform and like health insurance reform for our city. 8 budgets balanced in a row with surpluses. And these are illustrations of demonstrated reaching across the aisle to get problems solved. That's what we've got to do in Washington.
Does the crime in Lexington worry you, the violence that we've seen, the shootings?
Well, absolutely. Of course it does. I'm a mayor. And what I know is that, that even one homicide is too many. But I also recognize that we've got to get at the root cause. And this is why I'm talking about drugs. This is why I'm talking so much about this epidemic. Because 8 out of 10 of these shootings have something to do with drugs. Now, there's domestic violence, also domestic issues sometimes involved as well. But so many of these issues have to do with a culture and a drug culture that we've got to get our arms around. I say we've got to put, when we talk about jail, I say jail beds for dealers, yes, and that's what we've been focused on. But we need recovery beds for those who are addicted, and we need to move beyond the stigma associated with this and get our arms around the real problem. And that's what I've been advocating for in this campaign, and that's what I'll do when I'm in Washington in Congress.
The health care issue remains a major national debate. Do we keep Obamacare, in your view, or in managed care more aggressively as that particular law called for, or should health care return to a more free market scenario?
Well, I will defend the Affordable Care Act, Bill. Let me say that again. I will defend the Affordable Care Act. Now, Andy Barr has tried to repeal and replace it for 6 years, his #1 objective. Well, that would have meant 70,000 people in our district alone, in the 6th district alone, would have lost their health care. I am for continuous improvement. Anybody in business knows that you start something, it's not going to be perfect out of the gate. You got to work on it. But now, regrettably, Republicans, including Andy Barr, Andy at the very front, wanted to repeal it from the very beginning, wanted to wreck it from the very beginning, won't even give it a chance. Now, there's something wrong about that spirit. I find that spirit really reprehensible because it's not giving an opportunity for success. That's a problem.
Regulations have been cut by the EPA, and that has gotten a positive response by many in coal country, which has been, as you know, in rapid decline. Do you propose going back to tougher emission standards, or?
Well, I tend to refer to Mark Twain whenever I get a question about regulations, because I'm in a business and an industry, the construction industry, that's regulated heavily. But let me say what he says.
And coal has tripped up many a candidate in Kentucky,
and it
one
has,
way or the other,
you're right?
Yeah.
But Mark Twain said, Mark Twain famously said that too much of a good thing is a bad thing, except in the case of Kentucky bourbon, in which case too much is just enough. So we've got to look at regulations that way. We've got to recognize when too much is too much. And regrettably, our coal industry, the rug was pulled out from under our coal industry. Now, I believe that we've got emissions issues, and we've got to deal with climate change. And climate change is real. So when the EPA ignores these very real issues, that's a problem for us.
Do you support building a wall to slow illegal immigration along the southern U.S. border?
I believe in protecting our borders. I believe in secure borders, but I will admit to you that when I first heard of this wall, I thought it was crazy, and that was when Mexico was going to pay for it. Now, I sure think it's a crazy idea when American taxpayers are going to pay for it. There are better ways to secure the border. This is demonstration in an appealing way, perhaps, but is it going to be effective? There's technologies available today that we ought to be implementing and we ought to be using, and rather than talking about billions of dollars for a wall.
Many congressional districts around the country are seen as red or blue. There is no doubt that the 6th district is purple. You know, that is that it has been represented by Republicans and Democrats over the years. The seat has gone back and forth and has a history of that. How do you represent a thriving metropolitan city like Lexington, those growing cities that surround it, and farmland that is nearby as well? I mean, isn't this a very politically mixed district to try to take a cohesive message about to Washington?
Well, I grew up in a small town, I said that earlier, in Glasgow, and I've worked in so many of the communities in the 6th district right here, built plants, brought plants, helped recruit plants to the 6th district. So I really see it as a seamless initiative, a seamless challenge in a good way, that we can work together. We can work together to create positive results. I would continue to work, as I always have, in creating jobs. That's something that I do. I can sometimes say that, you know, I do it without thinking, that it's just part of my DNA to work to create jobs and opportunities for people, but then deal with these significant challenges and issues that we have, and that crosses all borders. You know, you don't have a hard border at the Fayette County, you know, any more than you do in Menifee County.
What do you do over the next week or 10 days in this campaign?
Well, we've got more forums, and we've got KET debates on Monday night. I'll be going out into the counties again and around us and visiting with folks, and constantly in a sort of continuous communication.
We appreciate you coming by.
Thanks, Bill.
Mayor Jim Gray, candidate for Congress on the Democratic side, and we're coming back in a moment with Democratic congressional candidate Amy McGrath on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We just visited with the Democratic congressional candidate, Lexington Mayor Jim Gray. We had State Senator Reggie Thomas here a couple of weeks ago, and all of the congressional candidates were invited to a forum in April co-sponsored by WKYT and still archived on WKYT.com. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath is here with us now. It is her first political race. She has run hard for the Democratic nomination for Congress. Candidate McGrath joining us, and we welcome you. Thanks for coming.
Nice
back.
to be
Appreciate
here.
it.
Yeah.
How's this experience been for you? Visiting around the district, learning, I mean, doing television interviews, all this kind of thing, making ads, running for your first political office.
Well, politics is all about people. And, you know, being a Marine Corps officer and being a leader in the Marine Corps was all about people too. You know, you've got to inspire them, you've got to listen to them. And so that's what I've been doing. And so far, I really enjoy it.
You feel good about the reception you're getting out there?
Absolutely, you know, because I'm no stranger to people telling me what they think, and me being receptive. I want to listen to all sides. I have no problems telling people what I think and the credibility that I have in many of these issues, and it's been good. It's been a very positive experience.
What do you think distinguishes you in this race? It makes the difference as you seek to represent this district, which is an interesting district, and we'll get to that in a little bit too.
Well, I think we need a new generation of leaders, not only in the Democratic Party, but in our country. I'm very concerned about the Democratic Party in general. We need a new generation, not just in terms of age, but also in terms of region, leaders for our country. I think those of us who are post 9/11 veterans, we're very concerned about where our country is going. And I think that one of the things that distinguishes me, for example, is I'm the only candidate in this primary race that has any federal government experience at all. You know, I was the Marine Corps liaison to all other federal government agencies for 2 years while stationed at the Pentagon. And I also have Hill experience. So, you know, in terms of experience, I've got it. And I've got the motivation to want to be one of those leaders that we need in our country.
Do you think you've gotten that message across? I mean, I think people have seen you, you know, with the helmet and the plane and the uniform, but that you also have some additional work that you've done.
I do. I mean, I think that I need to bring that message across because, you know, how do you get things done in Congress? You get things done by having credibility, and that's a basic function of leadership. No one's going to want to follow somebody who doesn't have credibility. I have credibility in the international arena. I'm the only candidate that does. And I have credibility in getting things done at the federal level as well.
Let's talk about some tough issues. The opioid crisis is really rough in Kentucky. Overdose deaths around the nation, 60,000 a year, we know. Kentucky has been deemed to be lacking in its response at this point. Is this, in your view, an issue that requires a federal response?
Absolutely. And, you know, if you look at history, we've had epidemics in our country before. We had a polio epidemic in the 30s and 40s and early 50s. We had an HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. How did we fix those things? How did we mitigate them? We mitigated them with federal government involvement, with a national response, with more funding to things like the CDC and the NIH, and coming at this problem at a national level. And we need to do that again. We need to get leaders who actually look at this as not only just a regional problem and not necessarily a problem that we just throw onto the counties and the states, but a real national problem, because there's not one answer to this opioid crisis. It's going to be multiple.
The President has declared a health emergency about this, but do you think the federal response has been empty so far, other than to heighten the profile of the problem?
Sure, and it's exactly what you just said. I mean, it's nice to declare it a federal emergency, and it's nice to tweet about it. We need something more than that. And what the President has done has really only been a fraction of what experts say we need to do in terms of funding to really attack this problem. And we have to attack it with science. We have to think about this. You know, the opioid crisis and this addiction, it's an addiction, it's a health issue. And we have to start looking at it as a health issue.
There is a rekindled debate about gun violence in America, certainly in the wake of these school shootings. We had one in western Kentucky earlier this year. Other mass attacks have happened around the country. How would you vote on any additional gun restrictions that might come before Congress?
Well, you know, I make no apologies that I support the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. I've shot many weapons in my career as a United States Marine, but I'm also a mom. I'm somebody with 3 small children. I'm very concerned about school violence. The guns and the violence in this country in terms of guns is very critical. And I think we need to attack it by having people who want to have reasonable solutions to these issues. So, for example, why have we not closed the gun show loophole already? Why have we not done that? You know, why have we not banned bump stocks? These are things that most gun owners and most Americans agree on. And I think we ought to get just reasonable people in office that want to tackle this and do the things that we all agree on now.
How do you deal with that balance between mental health issues and the need to report information at times that might save people?
Well, I think it's critical. I think mental health care in America is something that has been underfunded for many years. I know this. My mother was a psychiatrist, retired, so I've lived my entire adult life with Mom telling me about the problems with mental health care in America, and so we need to tackle this as a country.
The health care issue remains a major national debate. In your view, do we keep Obamacare in place, the Affordable Care Act, and do managed care very aggressively as it calls for, or should health care return to a more free market scenario, as some have, as the incumbent congressman has said, repeal and replace Obamacare?
Well, the current congressman that we have in this district has proven that he cannot lead on this issue. He has enthusiastically voted to throw 250,000 Kentuckians off of their health care. What the Trump administration has done and what the Republicans are doing are literally trying to undermine the health care system. Right now, we have states like Maryland and Virginia where the insurers have already come out and said that they're raising their premiums in October by 40 and 90%. I mean, this is the Republicans own this, and they're hurting people. What I think we ought to do is actually get people in office that want to fix the current system that we have, that go there in good faith, that want to tweak the Affordable Care Act, make it better. It was never a perfect piece of legislation, but it has done many Kentuckians a lot of good. And so what I propose are things like the public option, which allows you to choose whether you want a government plan or whether you want a private plan. Most Americans would be for that.
What is a public option?
What is it? Okay, so right now under the Affordable Care Act, you have a choice of private insurers. You may have a choice of Aetna, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, United. I propose you also ought to have a choice of Uncle Sam. Okay? And if you're like me and not afraid of the government, I had military medicine for 24 years. I'm not afraid of the government. And my family had it too. It's not that bad. If you're like me, I have no problems picking Uncle Sam. If you're afraid of the government and you want a private plan, then pick Aetna or United. So that would bring down prices because the private insurers would now have to compete with Uncle Sam.
So you say more people would be able to essentially buy into Medicaid, is that?
Well, it would basically be like a government-run insurance plan, just like what I have right now, you know, with TRICARE. And so what you could do is you would have a choice then of a private insurer or the public run plan. The other thing that I like is a Medicare buy-in plan for those who are 55 and older. Then they could buy into Medicare, which people seem to really like. And you could buy into it 10 years early. Why is that so important? Well, because there's a lot of people who are still in their jobs who want to retire, but they're still in it just for health care.
Regulations have been cut by the EPA that has gotten a positive response by many in coal country, which has been in rapid decline and employs a lot of Kentuckians. Do you propose going back to tougher emissions regulations?
Well, you know, I think the coal issue has been a political football by both sides. And I think what people say and what the experts say about the coal industry is that a lot of the decline is market forces. And so I think we ought to have a plan. I'm a military officer by trade. We have a plan for everything. We may not want coal to go in a certain direction. We may not want it to go away, but we need to have a plan for the day after if it does. And so I think market forces, fracking, automation, those are also responsible for a lot of the problems the coal industry's had in the last decade. And this is according to the coal industry. So, you know, let's focus on a comprehensive plan and really help that region. You know, our region powered this country in the 20th century. We need to have somebody to go up to Washington and say, hey, the country owes an investment back in our region to build a new economy for the future.
Do you support building a wall to slow illegal immigration along the southern border?
No, I think it's absolutely stupid. I mean, it's a 9th century solution to a 21st century problem.
So you vote no on any funding of that?
I would vote no on any funding, yeah, for that, unless it came in some sort of package where we got DACA recipients to be full citizens. Look, the president has already gone back on how long this supposed wall is supposed to be. It's really a stupid move, and but I'm not going to sit here and say, plant the flag and say I'm always going to vote one way or the other. That's the problem with politics today. We need to get people into Washington that actually want to make things happen.
Many congressional districts are either red or blue or seen that way. The 6th is purple. It has been represented by Democrats and Republicans over the years. It's Lexington, the major city, and growing cities and towns around it, and farmland around it. How do you represent a district that is that mix? That's our final question.
Oh, and it's an awesome question, because look, I'm not running to represent the people of the 6th district necessarily as a Democrat or as a Republican. I'm running to represent them as an American. That is what we need right now. You know, my husband's a Republican. That's America. Yes, I'm a Democrat, and I'm a proud Democrat. But you know what? We need people that can understand and listen to everyone. And that's why I'm running.
Amy McGrath, thanks for coming by. We appreciate it very much.
Great.
And stay with us now. We'll have a look ahead, a word about the May 22nd primary in just a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. And so here we are 9 days before the May primary election in Kentucky, which is Tuesday, May 22nd. That is when more than 3 million Kentuckians are eligible to vote. If you are voting in a partisan election on that day, you'll be able to vote as a Democrat or Republican, depending on your registration. Independents, everyone can vote in most of the city elections and also in judicial races. The polls will be open on May 22nd from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. GoVoteKY.org for Secretary of State information on the elections. That's Kentucky Newsmakers. Have a good week ahead.